Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and quietly asked, when did I stop feeling alive? You wake up every day, do everything you're supposed to, and still feel empty inside. I know that feeling because I lived it here in Denmark. But one ordinary morning, something or maybe someone made me listen again. Not to the world but to my own heart. Cold mornings and quiet hearts. It was one of those cold Danish mornings when the world felt completely still. The air outside my window was white with fog, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the radiator. I remember sitting there, staring at my cup of coffee, wondering why everything felt so heavy, even the simplest things like getting dressed or stepping outside. Denmark has long winters, the kind that make you question who you are when the sunlight disappears too early. I used to love mornings, the smell of coffee, the sound of people rushing to work. But now everything felt distant, like I was watching life through a window I couldn't open. I moved here for love. For a dream maybe. But somewhere along the way both started to fade. The person I loved became a stranger, and I started to lose myself trying to hold things together. When he left, he didn't take his things, just the warmth in the room. For weeks I stayed inside pretending to be fine. I smiled to my coworkers, I answered messages with short replies, but inside I was empty. My English lessons became my only routine. Each morning I'd play slow English recordings, stories about hope, courage, new beginnings. I didn't understand everything, but the rhythm of the voice somehow comforted me. It was like someone was speaking gently to the parts of me I had forgotten. One morning, while listening to a story about starting over, I caught a sentence that stayed in my mind. You can't heal where you got hurt. You have to move where your soul can breathe. That line changed something inside me. I stood up, opened the window, and let the cold air touch my face. It hurt, but it also reminded me that I was still here, still breathing. That I began to walk every morning after that. Slow steps. Quiet thoughts. Some days I practiced English words out loud. Some days I said nothing at all. But little by little, I began to understand something simple. Healing doesn't come from others. It starts when you decide to listen, not just to words but to yourself. And that's when I realized maybe this was never about losing him. Maybe it was about finding me. When words become mirrors, the more I listened to English stories, the more I began to hear myself inside them. Each sentence felt like a quiet mirror, reflecting back the things I had buried. My fears, my regrets, and my quiet wish to begin again. One evening, I sat in a small cafe near the Copenhagen Canal. The candles flickered on each table, and people spoke softly in Danish, their words flowing like music. I opened my notebook and began to write simple English sentences, not for grammar, not for practice, but for healing. I feel lost. I want to start over. I'm still here. The words looked small on paper, but they carried a weight only I could feel. For the first time in months, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was just honest. As I kept writing, a stranger smiled at me from the next table. He was reading a book in English. When he noticed my notebook, he asked, "Are you learning English too?" I nodded, a little shy. He smiled again and said, "That's brave. Words are doors, you know. Sometimes they open back to yourself." That night I walked home slowly, thinking about what he said. Words are doors. Maybe that's why I had been listening so much lately, not just to learn a language but to find the courage to open one of those doors again. Every word I learned began to feel more alive. Hope. Change. Enough. They weren't just vocabulary anymore. They were small lights guiding me through the fog. Sometimes I made mistakes while speaking, but this time I didn't care. I laughed at my own accent, my broken sentences, my pauses, because each mistake was proof that I was trying, proof that I was alive. Learning English slowly became more than study. It was therapy. Every sound, every word, every line I repeated was like breathing life into forgotten parts of me. And somewhere between grammar lessons and quiet walks by the sea, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, love doesn't always leave you. Sometimes it changes shape and waits for you inside your own voice. The letter I never sent. It was one of those gray Danish afternoons when the sky looked like unspoken thoughts, heavy, quiet, endless. I sat by the window of my small apartment, holding a cup of cold coffee, and opened a blank page on my notebook. For weeks I had avoided writing that letter, the one I never had the courage to send. That I started slowly, whispering each word in English as I wrote, letting the sound of the language soften the pain that Danish or Vietnamese couldn't carry anymore. Dear you, I began. I hope you're somewhere warm. Maybe drinking coffee that actually stays hot. I smiled a little. My voice trembled, but it felt good to hear it. My own voice speaking gently, not to someone else, but to the memory of who I used to be when I loved fearlessly. And I continued. I used to think love fades like the smell of rain after summer. But maybe love doesn't fade. Maybe it just changes color. Maybe it hides inside the small things. The way I still listen to English podcasts at night. Or how I still smile when I see your favorite word, breathe. Each sentence I read aloud became a small lesson. My mouth shaped the words slowly, carefully. Not because I wanted perfect pronunciation, but because I wanted to feel them. Breathe. Remember. Begin. I practiced these words until they didn't sound foreign anymore. Until they sounded like forgiveness. Halfway through the letter, I realized it wasn't about you anymore. It was about me, the part of me that stopped believing, that stopped trying, that stopped listening. The letter became a bridge between my broken English and my broken heart. Every mistake, every pause, every sigh was real, and that made it beautiful. When I finished, I didn't sign it. I just looked out the window at the soft Danish rain and said quietly, "Thank you." I didn't send the letter. But I did something better. I read it out loud again and again until the pain turned into rhythm, until my voice no longer shook, until I could finally understand what healing sounds like. And in that moment, English wasn't a foreign language anymore. It was my way home. The language of rain. They say Denmark has more words for rain than most countries have for love. Drizzle, shower, downpour, mist. Every kind of rain feels different here. But to me, that soft Danish rain became something else. A teacher. Every morning I walked to the cafe near the old harbor, where raindrops tapped gently on the window. I used to sit there alone with my headphones on, listening to slow English stories, voices that spoke like the rain itself. Calm, steady, patient. At first, I understood only pieces. A few words here and there. Hope, loss, begin again. But over time I realized language isn't only about words. It's about rhythm. It's about silence between sounds. Point one rainy morning. I tried something new. I whispered the story I heard, word by word, repeating after the narrator. I wasn't fluent. I wasn't fast. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of sounding broken. Because honestly, the rain didn't judge me. No one in the cafe cared how I spoke. It was just me, my voice, and the steady sound of drops falling on glass, like punctuation marks from nature. That's when it hit me. Learning a language isn't about perfection, it's about connection, to the story, to the moment, to yourself. I made a little rule for myself. Every time it rains, I speak English. Even just a sentence or two. Sometimes I describe the sky. Sometimes I talk to my coffee. Sometimes I just say, I'm still here. I'm still trying. And strangely, the rain started answering back. Not with words, but with peace. That's when I began to understand. Love, like language, never really fades. It just changes shape like water does. From tears to rain to the warmth of your breath when you whisper a new word into life. So now, every time I hear the rain, I smile. Because I know it's speaking the same language as me, quiet, patient, and full of meaning. And maybe that's what fluency really means, not speaking perfectly but feeling deeply. Conversations with strangers. It started with a smile, small, uncertain, but real. I was standing in line at a bakery in Aarhus, holding my usual coffee and trying to remember how to say, "Have a nice day" in Danish. Before I could speak, the woman behind me said, "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" In perfect English. I froze for a second. Then I laughed. "It is," I said slowly, hoping my accent didn't sound too heavy. She smiled. "Are you learning English?" That simple question turned into a 15-minute conversation about weather, travel, and life. She spoke slowly, clearly, as if she understood the rhythm of a learner's heartbeat, hesitant but hopeful. Walking home later, I realized something. Every stranger is a chance to practice, but also a chance to heal. Because when someone listens to you, really listens, it's like the world suddenly makes space for your imperfect words. The next week, I started a quiet challenge for myself. Talk to one stranger every day. It didn't matter if it was the barista, the bus driver, or the old man feeding pigeons near the park. I began to notice how conversations open like windows. At first, I focused on words, but soon I focused on connection. The tone, the smile, the pauses, the courage to keep speaking even when I made mistakes. Some days I walked away embarrassed. Other days I walked away proud. But every time I walked away stronger. One day, an old Danish man told me something that stayed in my heart. "You speak beautifully," he said, "because you speak with courage." That night, I wrote it down in my notebook and practiced the sentence again and again. Not to remember his words, but to remember how they felt. That's when I understood. Learning English isn't just about grammar or accent. It's about creating small bridges, word by word, heart by heart, until the world no longer feels foreign. So now, when I talk to strangers, I don't worry about mistakes anymore. Because every imperfect sentence is proof that I'm alive, that I'm trying, that I'm still becoming. And sometimes all it takes to find yourself again is to say hello. When words start to bloom, something beautiful happens when you stop chasing perfection and start chasing meaning. At first, my English sounded like a broken song, wrong rhythm, missing notes. But as I kept speaking, something inside me changed. My words began to flow, not from memory, But from emotion. One cold afternoon, I sat in a little park in Aarhus with my notebook open. The sky was gray, the trees were quiet, and I started whispering sentences to myself. I didn't care if people thought I was crazy. I just needed to hear myself again. I'm not afraid anymore, I said softly, then louder. I can speak. I can learn. I can grow. Each word felt like planting a seed. And slowly those seeds began to bloom. A few weeks later, I noticed something strange. People started understanding me more easily, not because my accent was gone, but because my voice was alive. Confidence has a sound. It's warm, steady, and impossible to fake. I started recording short messages every morning. Just me talking about my day. I'd listen again at night, hearing every hesitation, every mistake, every small victory. It was painful at first, but then it became beautiful, because when you listen to yourself long enough, you stop judging and start noticing. You notice how your R's roll a little smoother, how your pauses sound more natural, how your words begin to dance instead of stumble. That's when I realized speaking English isn't about being fluent. It's about being free to make mistakes, free to sound human, free to say something that matters, even when it's messy. So now when I speak, I don't chase perfect grammar, I chase the feeling. That gentle rhythm that says, I'm here. I belong. I'm enough. And maybe that's the real secret to learning English. It's not about words. It's about becoming brave enough to use your voice again and again until it feels like home. The language of love and loss. Love is strange. It teaches you more about communication than any language book ever could. When I first came to Denmark, I thought love would be my bridge to belonging, that maybe through someone's heart I could find my voice. But love, like language, isn't always kind. It tests you. It breaks you. And then, if you let it, it rebuilds you. There was someone I cared about deeply. We shared quiet walks by the harbor, coffee that always went cold because we talked too much, and laughter that needed no translation. But slowly things began to fade. Misunderstandings grew like shadows between us. Not because of the words, but because of the silences. One evening she said, "You don't speak like yourself anymore." That sentence broke me because she was right. That I had learned the grammar, the accent, the polite phrases, but I had lost me somewhere in translation. That night, I sat by the window and watched the rain fall on the Danish streets. Each drop felt like a word I never said, a truth I never dared to share. Then I realized learning English or any language isn't about speaking perfectly. It's about speaking honestly. Even if your voice shakes, even if your grammar falls apart. So I wrote her a letter in English, not perfect but real. I told her how I felt, how grateful I was, how lost I had been. And for the first time I didn't edit myself. I didn't translate my emotions. I just wrote them raw. She never replied. But it didn't matter, because when I sealed that letter, I knew something had shifted. I had learned to love and to let go in a new language. And maybe that's what fluency really means, when your heart and your words finally speak the same language. Where love never fades. They say time heals everything, but I think understanding does. Months passed. The air in Denmark grew warmer, and so did I. I started smiling at strangers, ordering coffee without fear, even joking with my Danish friends in English. My words weren't perfect, but they were alive. One morning, I returned to the same cafe where it all began, where the coffee first went cold, where I once sat in silence, afraid to speak. This time I brought my journal and whispered to myself, I made it. The barista smiled, recognizing me. The usual, she asked. Yes, I said. But this time make it hot. That small exchange felt like a victory, not over English but over the part of me that once believed I couldn't change. As I sat by the window, sipping my warm coffee, I thought about everything I'd learned, not from books or teachers but from living, from heartbreak, from silence, from daring to speak again, even when my voice trembled. The truth is, love never really fades. It just changes form. Sometimes it becomes courage, sometimes it becomes language, and sometimes it becomes a story you tell so others know they're not alone. If you're listening right now, maybe you're somewhere between fear and hope. Maybe your words still come out wrong, your accent still heavy, your heart still tired. But here's what I've learned. Every time you speak, even imperfectly, you are saying to the world, I'm still here. I'm still trying. I still believe. So keep speaking. Keep listening. Keep loving in every language your heart understands. Because the real journey isn't about learning English, it's about learning yourself. And that, my friend, is where love never fades.